So I was out riding a motorcycle. Can't ride the truck. Gas price is way too high. Anyway, so I thought I'd stop by the old Rembert Methodist Church and Graveyard. This is a very historical church. I've had information on a long time. It's just so far away from my house. I just needed to make a reason to come here, and being out riding is a good reason. It's very windy out today, and I hope you can actually hear me, because I know sometimes the wind will baffle the voice, and it's just really hard hearing those kind of videos. There are several family members from one or two families that are buried here that were all killed in the same day. It's a very tragic accident that happened, and I will cover that. But first, I'm going to go over the history of this church. Like I said, the wind is terrible. I hope you can hear me. So, this is one of the oldest Methodist congregations in South Carolina. The Methodist Society was formed in 1785. James Rembert built a chapel about a mile away from here. He had a plantation, but he built a chapel here. Now there's a town far away from here, probably, I don't know, about a half hour to 45 minutes drive, called Rembert. But Rembert Methodist Church is not really close to Rembert, the town. So anyway, so Mr. Rembert built in 1797, built a chapel here. Caleb Rembert, who I think was his son, donated 8 acres to the church in 1834. The church was built in 1835. At some point, Francis Asbury visited here. Now, if you know your Christian history, you'll know who he is. If you know your Methodist history, even better, even more so. He rode up and down the East Coast, helping to establish and preach at different churches. He was actually kind of a sickly man, but he pushed and he pushed. In most of the Methodist churches in the eastern side of the states, which at the time that's all there was, have him to thank for the fact that they are there. As you can see, it's a fairly large and impressive structure. I mentioned in another church that I did a long time ago, Salem Black River Presbyterian Church, is this. That is a steel rod that goes all the way through the church. Now, I've never seen them used on the bottom. I've always seen them used on the top. And what that's supposed to do is it's supposed to make the church more solid in case of an earthquake. Earthquakes were kind of, they had a big earthquake in the very early 1800s. And so you'll find your oldest churches will have those rods going through them. This has 2. You got that one, and then one just a little bit further down. I don't know that you can see it. Something that I noticed that I believe is on every one of these little pillars is a plaque right there. This one says, "In memory of Linda Louise Harriet, a pillar of the church." And each one of these pillars underneath this church, well, at least on the outside wall, are dedicated to someone whom they call a pillar of the church. It's a pretty neat idea, and I'm sure it's probably some kind of a fundraiser. An original idea. I thought it was pretty cool. As a former infantryman myself, I salute Corporal James Davison Harriet, who was born November 2nd, 1890. He died in action in France, October 12th, 1918, which is pretty much the end of World War I. I salute him. May 5th of 1860, several families decided to get together and meet at Boykin Mill Pond, which is several miles from here. You got to remember, back then, I'm saying 1860, that back then they didn't have cars. They had horses and buggies. And Boykin Mill Pond is probably more than an hour's drive in a car. Yeah, that sounds about right. So that's probably a full day's ride. I wonder if maybe they stayed somewhere when they got there. Families from Camden also came to visit. Boykin's Mill Pond at that time must have been a recreation area, because these families got in these flatboats and went out on the pond. It flipped and several died, mostly children. Now I've got the names of the people that died that's buried in this graveyard. I looked around, and you got to remember, these stones would be about 1860. They would be old, if they even put up a stone, and they'd be hard to find and hard to make out if you did find them. However, I did find that one right there. It's a 14-year-old girl. And then 3 stones down, I found another one, but it was really hard to make out. Of course, you can't see what that says neither from where you are. I'll show you a better picture of it here in just a second. Buried here is Mary Eliza Jenkins. Now, she was born in 1846 and died in 1860, so that make her 14 years old. Also buried in this cemetery, probably somewhere in this area, because by looking at the stones, I find that many of them seem to be intermarried, sharing the same last name, son of, daughter of, that kind of thing. Jerry McLeod, who was born in 1828 and died in 1860. Now, he was about 32 years old. Holly Adele Young, whom I did find a little bit further on down, the stone that you can barely make out. Holly Adele Young was 19 years old. She was born in 1841 and again died in 1860. Mary Ann Young, born in 1848, died in 1860. She would have been about 12 years old. Samuel Henry Young, born in 1852. Now, he would have been about 8 years old. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 people that are buried probably right in this area that all died on the same day. It's a very, very tragic day at the Boykin Mill Pond. By the way, Boykin Mill is still there. I don't think the pond is anymore. I think during the Civil War it got blown up or something. But there's a little community there, 3 or 4 really, really old buildings where they have like an old restaurant, an old general store. It's a pretty neat place to visit. If it wasn't so far away, I would go ahead and hop on a bike and go over there. But it's a pretty long ride. Can you imagine how long it would have been on a horse? Here's the stone of Miss Mary Eliza Young, or Jenkins.